Cool. Here we go.
Yeah.
Welcome.
That's new.
Yes. It's very official.
It's quite nice.
Yes. Welcome everybody to our meetup event in Australia and New Zealand. We've got 4 co-hosts here today. There is Andreas joining from Hamburg, Pip from Wellington, and there is Dan from Melbourne. I can't see Dan anymore here. Are you there?
Yeah, still here.
Yep, cool. You kind of disappeared from my dashboard. And so, yeah, welcome everybody. Andreas is here from Germany today, and I'm really so happy that he's here because we actually work together with each other in the case study, the client that he's talking about today. There are some others. Anna is here as well. She works at the same client. And Andreas, I've heard the talk before, and he'll be very honest. And I really like the talk because it just shows how organizational maturity is impacted through crisis as well. So it'll be really interesting. And yeah, it feels like for me a bit like a coming home thing. And I hope you will all enjoy it. Also, just very quickly tuning over to Australia to Dan. He officially apologized already for us in lockdown again here in New Zealand. Dan, do you want to say a few words for your meetup groups and what you're doing over there in Australia?
Yeah, I just wanted to say welcome to everyone coming from Australia, the Melbourne, Sydney groups. Thanks for coming along. It's good to see you all again. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this talk from Andreas.
Cool.
Thanks,
I would say, Andreas, over to you. Oh, and actually, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We'll try to answer them. And also there is enough time afterwards to just stay here and have a chat and have all the questions answered afterwards.
All right, I'm trying to catch up with the technology here and share my screen so we can actually begin. You guys can help me. You see my presentation screen, or you see?
That is the presenter
slide
at the moment.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's right. All right, guys. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this talk, and thank you, Silke. As you mentioned, we have had some touch points in the organization. I will mention from time to time. So also I see 2 colleagues of mine. I think Anna Sophie is here, and also Lavinia Cross has joined this talk from Hamburg. So you can ping those guys as well if you have questions. So let's just start. And as you see, the talk is called Quest to Increase Organizational Maturity, There and Back Again, which I kind of stole from The Hobbit, I think, from the book. And the guys from New Zealand can probably relate most to it. So let's start. Just a short intro. This is us, the small Kanban training and consulting company in Hamburg. It's me and my wife, who's actually kicked off the whole the topic I'm going to talk about with this client. She's currently on maternity leave with our 3rd kid, who was born last year, October. And she was heavily involved at the beginning of the whole journey. So I'm basically reporting also the things she's done as well. So let's move on to the basic topic.
She's highly guilty that we have Kanban through me in New Zealand nowadays.
Yeah, she is partly involved in that with Silke as well. All right, guys, let's get started. So I guess you're all familiar. So how do you do Kanban, right? How do you start? What would you do? Throw a buzzword at me, come on. What do you do initially, right? Is a question here.
Static.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. Perfect. Basically, you apply static, right? What does that mean? So what it means is usually we take the current way of working, whatever you're doing, and map it somehow onto a Kanban system. And this usually involves some workflow, some tickets, which are usually or hopefully work that customer requested. We have some meetings, cadences called in Kanban that we implement during the static. And we have rules, agreements, things to measure, metrics, data, and so on and so forth. And what else happens after that is that we apply practices and principles and move on from there, right? So no rocket science here. The question is, if we know we all know that, and we still see that Kanban systems are kind of different, right? So which factors determine how far we get, even if we start with static and if we move on with principles and practices. So we may think about stuff that influence the implementation, like scope of work, for instance, right? What you're looking at. Is it only your own service? Maybe it's not even a service, maybe it's only a team. So we also consider things we want to achieve, we strive for. So objectives is a key term here. And implementations also are kind of limited by the knowledge of the Kanban knowledge within the organizations, of course, that influence how far you can get. And by the end of the day, it's also the culture and the values that determine your initial Kanban implementations and also how they evolve over time. Right. So you might ask, well, right. So what is it all about? Right. Is it what's so special now? The question is the degree of your implementation also determines the degree of inner impact. So at the beginning, you might see Kanban systems that only focus on, or maybe initially focus on getting things done, maybe get the people out of overburdening and create an environment where quality, is kind of respected, and also people can take pride in the things what they do, right? You may move on, and if you increase the degree of your implementation, you may end up with something like more customer orientation. You move on to what customer need, and you may implement an end-to-end Kanban system, right? And you manage the flow end-to-end across multiple, maybe departments, teams, whatsoever. And you may move on into the area of you get more predictable, your customers get happy, you run multiple services, which operate in a kind of predictable way. And if you manage to do it over a long period of time, you get something like you move on into anticipating needs, and you become more or less like maybe robust, right, in your business and your service delivery. So you kind of ensure long-term survival, right? So the implementation of your Kanban systems and how they evolve, and this is basically the key message, determines the degree of the impact and the outcomes you get, right? However, so as you see, there are multiple variables, so many variables that determine the implementation. And the challenge which the maturity model, the Kanban maturity model, tries to kind of tackle on and help you navigate through the waters of all kind of flavors you see in Kanban implementations, right? So the KMM is here for the purpose of being a playbook, right? To drive your evolutionary change as a coach and as an organization, and always having the outcome in mind. And the outcomes usually are related to any business relevant things you get, right? In your service delivery. So the coaching agent or the change agent is actually a tool, something like a playbook, right? You can apply, so you can navigate through all these different variables and different depths of implementations, and apply things that are appropriate to your situation. this is Kleiner, the key message, the appropriateness of practice adoption that kind of fits to the culture you find in your organization. So you usually try to avoid things like overburdening of the organization and the people, and also get out of some kind of plateau, right? The full summit plateau, we call it in Kanban. So usually what you see in Kanban implementations are two failure modes. It's the full summit plateau where you know, oh, we have stickies on the wall. It's all great. We are awesome. That's it. So how about the outcomes? Well, we don't know. Who cares? We have stickies on the wall. This is the the full summit plateau, and the other implementation kind of when you get resistance by overreaching and by applying practices that are not congruent to culture and values, right? So this is what the KMM is all about, is basically helping you to avoid those two failure modes and develop the organization in congruence to the values and the practices, so you actually get to something, the business outcomes you want to achieve. So what are the ingredients? It's just a really short overview of the Kanban Maturity Model and its parts. So we have culture, practices, and outcomes, where we understand culture as how you make decisions, right? And how you make decisions is usually based on what is important to you, what values are present in the organization. And this is the way how you make decisions. And on the other hand, the second part is the practices, right? The practices are the things you do, your routines, your habits, and also the Kanban practices, of course, right? And taking this together, you get to the outcomes. An important part is the outcomes here are demonstrated results, which hopefully are valued by your customers, and also our internal benefits, right? This is what we talk about, what we mean in Kanban Maturity Model when we talk about the outcomes. This is something you can observe, yeah? And hopefully your customers can actually observe, right? It's not like a gut feeling or something you talk about, but things you can maybe even track or count. So these are the main ingredients of the Kanban Maturity Model. And just to give you an overview, the structure, this is just this simplest poster that you can find on the Kanban Maturity Model. You have the culture. This is how you make decisions, right? This is the whole part of who you are, what's important to you. And given that, you have on the other side the practices, which usually are kind of congruent to your culture. Taking those together and you get the outcomes, right? This is what you get if you move on as an organization and you mature. So the main message is, it's not that Kanban that matures, it's your organization. The practices are there anyway, right? If it's like only the visualization part on team level, or is it the portfolio visualization, there's no maturing in the practices, it's just how you apply them. And this depends on the maturity of the organization. So main point is, we are not talking about the maturity of your Kanban, but the maturity of the organization. So just to give you a glimpse and kind of wrap up and for the Kanban Maturity Model before we move on into actual case study. All right, let's kick it off. What we are talking about, and my colleagues Anna and Lavinia can help me out if I miss something or anything you find wrong or not in the same right direction. So actually, this organization, we are moving again to this slide. When it was once created, we had 8 teams. Things changed. We had 6 teams. Now we are moving ahead to 8 again. So it's the larger compound of multiple teams distributing across 3 countries. I think it's going in a couple of weeks. We are going to be in the 4 countries, right? So it's 10 teams. And 10 teams, exactly. So it's a moving target. the point is it's a large one. Building features means that usually more than one team is involved. We have a multi-tier Kanban system in place to coordinate the work and the teams. The rest of the whole enterprise are rather siloed, right? Particularly the IT and the business department, and there are some departments in between. So the IT can talk to the business, not directly, but through another department. So you guys, if you swimming in enterprise context, you're probably all familiar with that. That's nothing special, actually, right? And the good thing is we have an IT leadership, in particular that case, which is more or less Kanban minded and open and knowledgeable and or educated and trained, which is a good start. And as we saw in the beginning, the amount of Kanban knowledge in your organization also determines how far you get with it. So this is, I think, a very important and good start. Other factors, well, it's a large German company in the traditional industry, right? It's a logistics sector. They operate globally. IT is rather a cost center than a profit center. So you can imagine that this has implications also on the implementation. And so I put the newly in brackets. It's not that new anymore. It's been there for a while. For a couple of years, development is running. And it includes like dozens of business verticals. And the whole thing is tightly integrating multiple business processes, which are more or less complicated, given that the global logistics requirements can be really tricky and very different across domains and also across customers. So it's quite a challenging environment, I would say, regarding the complexity of the requirements, customer needs, is also technical complexity. Just to give you a glimpse that it's not uncommon that from first contact to the customer until go live, it can be months, maybe even 2 years or more, right? So this is how the business operates. And just to give you what kind of departments and services in Kanban speech are involved, multiple, right? The customer usually is contacted through your accounting team. We have the supply chain services, we have regional services. So this would be this whole part. Then we are going to talk about more like building the platform and support the services. And of course, there's people involved who really roll out and onboard the customer that they can usually use the platform. In this talk, we are more or less focusing on these areas of business analysis, software engineering, user design of the platform, deployment services, which those are the people and the services involved in this case study and the Kanban implementation. I'm sorry. Okay, let's start. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's not like a newly built, not 1-2 years. It's been running now, I think, for 5 years, 5.5 years. The start was in January 2016. When it was kicked off, usually as a small nucleus with initial teams started off. And it went initially quite well. And usually if you are in the early stage and maybe if you can relate to the Kanban systems improvement class, so the KMP2 class and the case study there. You remember, guys, which one is it? What happens initially? Everything is very fine, and then you reach the Posed Science case study, right? This is kind of reminds me of what happened initially, right? So here's a picture of what happened. What is it? Can you relate to it? It's not New Zealand. It's another beautiful country. How does it look like? Anyone? Ideas?
It looks empty.
It looks empty, yeah. And kind of flat, right? So what might that be? One of the failure modes of Kanban implementations, or actually any other, maybe.
False summit.
False summit, yeah. And the last word is?
Plateau.
Plateau, thank you. This is actually a plateau, and it's in Sweden, one of my favorite places to be. And this location is like in the middle of Sweden, close to the Norwegian border, where I usually travel to, like 900 something meters above sea level. It's probably laughable for you guys in New Zealand. However, it's a region where you can see really far ahead of you, and it's a flat area. So it's called actually Flatruet in Swedish, which basically means a flat road. And it's like 30-40 kilometers straight road on a plateau, right? So this is just to visualize to you as a metaphor what happened. They reached kind of a plateau, right? Everything was kind of okayish, right? But not a lot happened. So I think by the end, or 2018, where the Kanban Maturity Model kind of was kicked off by Theodora and some other guys. So Susanne got involved into the beta program, and this is where the talks start to the client and the kickoff with the initial presentation about the Kanban Maturity Model. What is it all about? What could be the benefits for the organization? It was presented to the leadership team, and they kind of liked it, especially the outcome orientation. So this was a pitch to the IT leadership team as a starting point to kick off the initial Kanban Maturity Model appraisal, including the client, and within the beta program with Theodora and some other guys who were running it by that time. So this is where it's all kind of starts. And it will were received and kicked off November 2018 roughly, right? So let's look what the initial appraisal or more or less determination of what's going on in the organization in January 2018. And this is just an example of just to give you the architecture of the whole thing. The columns are the general practices of Kanban, and you see all kinds of flavors of implementations according to the maturity levels. And the main point here is, of course, you see a lot of practices, but if you zoom in, you see that across multiple maturity levels, you have greens, you have reds, you have yellows, you have empty spaces, right? So the thing is that reality is kind of not that linear. It more or less looks like a heat map, right? Across multiple areas, you can have something which is already working quite well, but you can see gaps, you can see things that are not applied at all. So the main point here is, once you do it, you will figure out that, oh, it's not like I can pinpoint and say, okay, that's like clearly you're here right now. No, it's not the case, right? Some things, especially like in the visualization sector, which is kind of typical for Kanban implementations, you potentially will see more practices applied with a greater depth, and you will find the gaps maybe elsewhere, right? So it's like, like a heat map. That's my term for that. That was the practices appraisal. If then what happened is in parallel is also the cultural appraisal. So if we look at maturity level 1, for instance, transparency was something that was already working quite well. So people would rather show and not obfuscate what's going on and enable collaboration. However, acts of leadership by that time was not something really well consistently, not even to a degree applied, where you would say, well, this is something that is working very well. So taking initiative, getting things done, taking risk was something like, you might say it was a gap, right? Something missing. However, evolutionary change was already going on since we started with the whole Kanban journey. You might say that you find evidence for evolutionary change, but maybe not consistently applied. And collaboration, especially across silos within the organization, and by that time also across teams, which were more or less responsible for the business areas, was not very well applied in that case. Looking at the next maturity level, we have basic understanding of, well, how work is, what is the work, how it flows, that you know, what affects lead times and so on. It was kind of present, as I mentioned in the beginning. We had quite a knowledgeable leadership team, which was a good thing to begin with. However, flow, right? If you tell me you value flow, then you will probably will focus on the things that are customer relevant and how they flow through the system. And that was at that time not really present, and I will show you why. Also, respect in that case, maybe only partially present. It doesn't mean respect in that case that people don't behave professionally in the daily business, but respect in terms of empathy for cognitive and system limitations within the constraints of the organization, especially how much you can push into a system. So let me give you an example. This was an image, I think, beginning of 2019. And you see we have 8 teams, and we have roughly 55 business epics in the system on parallel. So the WIP would be 55 in that case, and you see that was growing disproportionately to everything that has been delivered by that time, and jumped in stressful situations from roughly 15, which is more or less appropriate, to 55. So flow, respect of WIP limits, no way. I haven't seen those for a while, right? Was not applicable by that time. And the interesting thing is that if you do that, you check for the practice adoption, and you check for the culture, which I recommend always doing, right? And you will find, well, we have all kinds of practices, right? But it kind of doesn't match the culture, match to the culture. And the thing is that the level of the Kanban adoption is basically overreaching. This is the one of the failure modes of implementing Kanban systems. Second to the full summit plateau, you try to implement practices that basically are incongruent to the culture and the values you find in an organization. And they won't stick, and probably they won't work, right? And they didn't. So the result is we had difficulties to establish and maintain Kanban practices because they do not match the culture. And as a consequence of that, of course, you get limitations in in the outcomes you can reach or expect, right? So this, I think, a very good picture to summarize incongruence, right? You try to lift something which is really heavy because it does not match your culture. So what happened next, right? Since it was like kind of initiative and aligned with the IT leadership team, these were the recommendations which resulted in after the assessment to focus on the culture in leadership style in order to foster collaboration and flow across all teams, right? And also work on the business purpose to define measurable targets and a baseline for everyone involved, right? So let's have a look at that. That was the recommendations to align the culture to the practice adoption so it will stick. What do you think happened next, right? Yeah, well, you might say, well, next summit plateau. No, not really, right? It's a catch picture. Everyone got comfortable. Well, a little bit. However, there was an agreed way forward, but it was really a tough nut, right? It was not easy and progressing kind of slow. However, we increased the focus on leadership team and cross-team collaboration aspects to consolidate the Kanban practices at least at level 2. And for that was necessary to drive the cultural improvements across the teams, right? So we actually get into a state of better flow. And the good thing is here, so from the perspective of acts of leadership, we had a kind of a crisis, right? And this crisis was that no feature were delivered for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks in that case. And the leadership team kind of started thinking, and so what is going on? We have more than 20 features in progress with roughly like 10 user stories average, right? So you can 20 times 10 user stories, roughly 200 user stories distributed across 8 teams. And the question is, well, everyone is kind of busy, right? Everyone is finishing user stories, but the customer requested work items, the features in epics in that case, are not getting done. And that for 3 weeks. So that's the slogan of never waste a good crisis, but because it's also an opportunity to dive in and to change things, right? And this is what actually happened. The leadership team said, okay, we kind of need to get the system under control. We need to control WIP, because otherwise everyone is blocking each other, and not, although everyone is busy, but not a lot of things are coming out of this. So what happens then? We try to visualize an end-to-end flow to make focus more on what happens above or on the next level above the teams. Then within the teams, introduce kind of workflow level Kanban system. Try to get the dependencies under control. We introduced the team capacity tokens, something like that, so we could control how much items are actually in the system with regards what the teams can actually finish. And also, on the other hand, some technical measures and actions were implemented to drive shared code ownership across the teams and move them kind of out of their maybe tunnel vision of what they're doing. And this also involved Patrick Steyert. You maybe know this guy, who is kind of the upstream guru. And we had also included and brought him to the customer, driving like, you probably know Flow Lab, right, and simulation. And to be honest, it took 2 years, right? 2 years to implement something like capacity tokens, not the physical ones, right, but the virtual ones, in order to get control of WIP across the 8 teams, right? So that's not an easy task, right? So, however, the impact was visible. It was painful, but visible. Painful in the sense that things which were already there anyway started to be more present and visible. So we had changing demand patterns all the time, right? You can imagine it's like, I think it's like 14 business domains, business verticals distributed across teams. And the challenge is that your customer requirements usually don't care how many teams you have or verticals or whatever you call them. They just need features, and these can cover or go across multiple features. So collaboration across teams is like always required, right? So we had dependencies. Some items were important and urgent, but not ready for delivery. So this is something that emerged after the implementation of an end-to-end workflow. And we had to enforce kind of cross-team collaboration in order to actually finish customer recognizable requests. So just to give you a glimpse, when we are standing right now, it's already like mid of June 2019. And the stressors, which is visualization, talking about if you run into WIP limits and so on and so forth, started to show effects, right? And this is just to remind you, this is the assessment of January 2019, and then we have June 19, right? And you see more of the green bubbles are starting popping up in the map. That means that more of the practices were applied across the general practices of the Kanban. So visualization, now we have managing flow a lot better, make policies explicit is an important part, and also the feedback loops. So again, reminder, the cultural appraisal from January 2019, and we move on into June, like half a year later. You see that we almost, we have no red zones in ML1 anymore. We still have issues with pushing work into the system, like asking in the Kanban meetings, like, well, who is like, who has Slack, who would like to start something? Right. However, the flow is a lot better now, and I will show you what actually happened with metrics. After 55 epics in progress, we are down to roughly 20 across 8 teams, right? So you see this, we got kind of hand on the whip and starting managing flow a lot better than before. The challenge in that environment still is that the surrounding organization, right, and the maturity of the surrounding organization is kind of like a hidden hammer that could hit you at any time, and sometimes you can do nothing about it. So in that case, there was some stress, and the ship in that sense got into storm, pressured by upper management, which resulted in kind of regressions from ML2 back to ML0 or 1, depending who is screaming the loudest. So in that case, there was challenging again, and the challenges of keeping your pace and keeping the maturity levels even after, even in stressful conditions. And usually in such huge enterprises, it's always not that easy if you operate in your kind of in your bubble. So the storm can hit you anytime. And we use this kind of situation to discuss, well, what is actually going on? What do you need, right? And the needs were, well, upper management or top management demands increase of speed, demands predictability, and we kind of need to concentrate on metrics and forecasting and improvements, so we can actually keep, make promises even under pressure, right, that we can keep, right, to build trust even with upper management. And this is something we started to focus on and concluded. So actually the whole organization needs to be at least level 3, because this is where the fun is, right? This is where you get predictable and consistent outcomes, and this is what they require in the business context, right? The good thing is that the IT leadership understood this and articulated to the whole group and start working on it, right? So this was kind of an important message to everyone. We need it, right? This is quite important. We do not want to be called liars, right? Because we break our promises, but we need, even if we have lots of deadlines which are imposed, we need to get under control what we are capable of delivering. So the achievement so far was we had steady communication, improved collaboration across the teams. We had established like cadences, twice a week, kind of a Kanban meeting and replenishment meetings and release planning meetings and everything going on, right? That was a good thing. We had better management of dependencies across the teams, awareness, and also as using them as stressors. Improved liquidity means like what kind of business area the teams can work on if the feature comes around, right? Which is not usually in your maybe competence area. And we also introduced classes of service, which the client defined to their own context to avoid constant overcommitment, right? And to also to demonstrate what is urgent and maybe what is also promised to customers or upper management. How we did it? Well, we visualized managed blockers on all kinds of levels, also focused on VIP aging. I will show you all the diagram in a minute, so you have an understanding how that was actually implemented. Trying to get into real pool, to a pool system, respecting the capacity of the whole system and of course the individual teams. Try to implement the end-to-end workflow, right? And in that sense, starting kind of reassessing the organization based on the Kanban Maturity Model. And this is just a glimpse of what has been implemented. I think it's an older picture. Currently, it looks differently again, but just to give you an impression what information is present here. This is a Tableau thing actually, right? Why? Because Jira is not capable of presenting the data and the information people usually need to make proper decisions, right? So you see all kinds of work items here on the left-hand side, and including their expected lead times and how they are doing according to the lead time. This is something we still are using in a different form, it looks right now, just to manage the risk of being late and to manage when we need to start things, right? And you see also on the right-hand side, the tiny spots and slots, it's how much WIP the individual teams actually have, right? And this is like what I would say, managing using instruments, right? Do not fly blind, right? And it's worked out very well, and it's still working out well. And we are, I think, improving by a cadence of 3 months the whole Tableau thing, and adding information which is important to make proper decisions. Just to give you a glimpse. And that was roughly beginning of 2020. So guess what happened then?
COVID.
Yeah, the asteroid hitting the planet, right? This nasty, annoying thing called COVID. That's a punctuation point, exactly. And it's hit really hard, like really hard, especially the organization or part of it. So what happened? What happens if you have, as a whole, a low maturity organization, and you stress it? They usually panic. And in that case, what happened? Somewhere someone made a decision, and it looked like, oh, let's get rid of 50% of the people. And basically, it's of course external ones. And then, oh shit, I forgot about the roadmap. We are not going to be able to deliver what we promised because we got rid of 50% of capacity. Let's ramp up again. So you fire the people with experience, you get new ones that you need to train, and so on and so forth. Also, some other things happened in the department area. So internal decisions, again, oh, let's reorg because we have demand we need to meet, and hopefully the reorganization into cross-business area teams will help us to deal with the demand. And simultaneously, another change was implemented. Oh, let's try OKRs to achieve internal leadership alignment within the group, which is already was challenging enough, and protect the system from more commitments or overburdening from outside. So multiple things going on in parallel, right? And this is the consequence of it. This is a throughput diagram of the business epics. And you see that beginning or mid of 2020, the delivery rate kind of, went down by 50%, right? And all the changes, COVID situation, ramping up, ramping, down and up again, then reorganizing the teams to meet the demand, implementing other changes had a significant effect on the business outcomes of the organization, right? And I must admit, this is like curse and a good thing at the same time. For this picture, I got, screamed at in a professional way, because you cannot show it to anyone. That's embarrassing. It must be not true. It's a lie. Let's check the data. And other people said, wow, that's really interesting. Is that true? So this is a fantastic stressors to get discussions going, but also a word of caution, be really cautious who you talk to and where you show it, right? Depending on the maturity of organization, it can have multiple effects that are even unpredictable with people you think you know, right? However, it's a good thing to cause stress and get discussions going. What is actually, why is it, because it's so honest, right? It's incredibly honest to look at the data and think, wow, there is no place to hide anymore for anyone, right? However, So now you might ask, well, that looks bad. Everything for the bin? No, not really. It was, of course, challenging, and not everything was a waste, what we've done so far. So you need to be aware that low maturity organizations have this tendency to regress back when they are kind of stressed. However, with kind of heroic efforts of management and staff, we've been able to implement and deliver to the 3 major customers, I think this year, what has been promised, even if the promises were made elsewhere. And how we had to reduce the capacity, but we got the WIP under control. There's like tons of irrefutable demand because, you know, they were already committed maybe even 18 months before, so you can do anything about it. But we implemented the service classes for planning, and also we used lead time calculation to determine the starting point of the fixed state deliverables of epics. That was really helpful, and I think we're still doing it, and it's really important. We had like a growing failure demand because once you have customers on board that start, you know, using your platform, and you have big customers, you get a lot of, you know, bugs, and you have requests and rework whatsoever. However, the people in this organization, and including IT and the product management, got really good at demand shaping, brutal demand shaping. We know the queues are growing, right? But we try to fix the most important things, so it doesn't eat too much capacity of the overall system. And we still have challenges in leadership, right? And however, the whole idea of the flow manager in this case, which are called delivery leads, was really helpful to get a grab on managing work, making decisions, communicating across team. So this was rather successful implementation of this, you know, of the head of a flow manager in that case. And this is just to show you what's going on recently, a development of, you know, 2 to maybe even 3 years now. We have the WIP under control. It's going down. Discussions are always about, do we have capacity to start something new, or shall we postpone and rather focus on finishing stuff before we actually begin anything? So you might ask now, so, well, oh, where is the KMM now? Well, it's kind of what it did help with applying the Kanban Maturity Model is kind of a sense-making tool, right? If you operate in such organizations, it's rather complex. So you can bring structure into this complex environment, and in the discussions, it can help you guide coaching and also management decisions, depending if you can tackle especially what are the outcomes you strive for. Let's look what you need and then apply the practices. And this is actually my personal favorite, to move focus from fixing broken people, right, to fixing the management system of work, right? And actually try to act your way to a new culture or identity, right? Not focus only on people. It's not like they're broken, right? Usually it's a systemic conditions that make people feel and act in a certain way. So KMM is really helpful in that case. Help you see clearly what's going on, right? Even if you don't like it, especially the metric stuff. And it's a great tool to get in contact and, you know, with management and especially upper management, also stakeholders. If you start talking about business outcomes, what the needs. But however, here's the challenge: if you can agree on the outcomes and the needs, right? But still, it's rather helpful. And the hope is that the whole discussion is moving also into across department discussions, and not focusing only on those little tiny bits of engineering and maybe product management, but also take into account like account management, delivery teams who actually implement the stuff with the customer, and so on and so forth. So actually widen the implementation of maybe of the Kanban system. Maybe it's too far-fetched, but at least widen the implementation of people involved in the discussions. So for me, learning here, my personal insights, And maybe a couple of words of caution. If you operate in a bubble, and usually it is the case with large organizations, in a bubble within a low maturity environment, whatever you're doing with your KMM, it's always in risk. You cannot control strange or weird decisions within large organizations, so just be prepared, right? It can hit you like the storm that can hit the ship on the sea, right? And second insight for me, if the individuals and their survivability within this organization, like social status and political status, is like a predominant driver for change. So how can I personally survive within this storm? It can help, yeah, right, like in crisis, and motivate change, but only, you know, to a certain degree. It can swing back. So don't, you know, pick your battles. Don't get crucified in such an environment. And the third point for me was, if people are caught in a stress relief loop, like inside, it still happens, right? In the beginning of a year, it's always very stressful. Then we have a summer and maybe autumn, it's more relief, but then the stress comes back again and you implement stuff. And then comes the relief and people are like, oh, thank God, right? We are out of overburdening. The challenge with change management in that context, it usually remains until the next phase of stress relief. And then people drop it because they're just stressed and they're relieved that the overburdening is over. And then it's hard to make change stick, right? So let's look where this brought us overall. Currently, and I think for many months now, we have increased consumption of change capacity as on the level of the whole organization, which is consumed now also implementing, experimenting with OKRs on different levels, too many, too much. It's something which drains a lot of change capacity out of the organization. In parallel, we have restructuring initiatives. We have currently like new attempts to think strategically, lots of balls going on. So nobody's talking about KMM or anything right now, and for months now, and I'm not doing it as well because it kind of doesn't make sense. However, using like the elements of the Kanban Maturity Model as a coaching tool, and still thinking about the art of the possible, even in the current situation, and be happy with little things like adding metrics now to the leadership team and discussions within the OKRs. Yeah, after 2 years, I'm so happy. And also using the material of the Kanban training material from the KMM class and KCP to ramp up, educate, inform, like product management department, also leadership level, kind of like culture hacking attempts, right? Now and there, which is kind of a good thing because we have the material as an AKT, and you can use it in your organization and design maybe workshops and try to influence the culture and make some changes, even if it's like on certain points. And another insight for me is that, you know, you can do whatever you want on team level. It won't be enough actually, right? So playing around with teams has its clear limits, what you get out of it. So you need to tackle different departments, cross-team collaboration, and look beyond the organization, maybe different departments, right, and different parties involved in customer communication and so on and so forth. If you really want to get and change, you know, deep change and significant change that will impact also the customers. That's certainly not an easy thing to do. So message here is, it doesn't matter if you implement like a super duper Kanban system with your 8 teams, as long as the implementing department or the accounting team, so more upstream, are not playing along with you, right? It will clearly have its limitations, right? So let's wrap up. I hope I'm, well, it's 9 o'clock. Perfect. My learning points here, you can use it, right? You can use it openly, visibly. You can lead discussions with leadership team. You can use it as a stealth mode. It works, right? It's really helpful. Second point is it's a great tool for alignment within the organization, alignment across teams, and also alignment across change management initiatives. However, the good thing is it puts outcomes into focus, but this can be really challenging because focusing on the business outcomes, it's not always easy for organization, and it's also not easy for change management, right? It can be a source of friction. And the last thing for me is it's really hard to unlearn. So once you do it for a while, you always thinking, okay, well, what's going on? What's the culture? What are the business outcomes we want to achieve? And this is also like a possible stressor for you as a change agent and for the organization, because you need to kind of hammer out the outcomes people would like to see. And sometimes it's, you need to get rid of obfuscating what you really want and get it out of the people involved in order to move on. And sometimes it's really hard. However, this is something, for me personally at least, hard to unlearn, and I'm kind of thinking always in this model of what are the outcomes, what is the culture, what are the appropriate practices right now in order to achieve the things what we want as a business. So I think that's coming to an end then. And thank you guys, thank you Silke for having me here today. And I'm done.
And thanks, Daniel and Pip, for co-facilitating and co-hosting. Thanks, Andreas. Awesome talk. There was actually one question as we were going along from Martin.
Yeah.
I'm interested whether you have data that indicates whether the increased throughput in epics also resulted in an increased delivery of business value.
So you're talking about the outcomes, or well, it's an easy answer to that. As I mentioned in the beginning, you have in that business, if you want to implement a customer, you start the discussion what they need really early in the process to figure out and to sign a contract at all, right? This is where it starts really early. And usually IT is not, at least in the past, was not even involved. Neither the product owners, right? But however, once it's set, it's not a hard question to determine is it something valuable or not, because it's required for the customer to operate the logistics business, and usually, so maybe I can reverse the answer. The probability that you deliver something useless is really low, right? For at least currently, and this is also what improved over the years, and it's not necessarily even means that it has anything to do with Kanban Maturity Model, but the communication with the customers became more direct. People in the organization become more involved in deciding what the customer needs, and also laying out what the requirements are. So basically, once things are delivered, it's usually something of value. This is at least my position and my experience in that context, right? Of course, there's some rework and details. That's okay, but usually it's of value.
So I guess my question was whether you had data that indicated that.
Okay, I see. So the business is not like you implement something and then you can see and sell, and then you can see data that like would indicate that you implemented something of you can run your business better. That's certainly not the case, right? The stuff they usually sell is a logistics service, and the platform is just one part of it. Right, so they sell a whole package, and then you need a platform to operate, order management, for instance, and it comes as a whole package, right? So there is currently no way of determining how much of it what you implemented has influenced the customer's decision of going along with you or picking another logistics provider. It's a really complex sales process, I would argue. Short answer to you, Martin, is no, right? No data.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Other questions?
there's a Moises raising his hands.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for sharing your experience. I was just wondering if you faced any people who were skeptical of the maturity model and how you got them to buy into the process.
Yeah, sure. I think even in the coaching team, there were times when people were skeptical about it. And however, as I mentioned at the beginning, the leadership team is quite, so the good thing is we have a long-term relationship to the leadership team. It's in a good and trustworthy relationship. And I think most, or not even, maybe even all involved in the IT department have some kind of went through the Kanban training. Which is a good thing, and that made a lot of things easier, right? And also maybe what is made a little bit more easier is the discussion. Okay, what do we really need, right? What are the outcomes we want to see? Not always, I have to admit, and Anna will probably support me here. The discussion about what you really want requires that you get agreement of what you want, right? And you reflect on what you really want as an organization, which is not an easy job, right?
And if I may add that you have to do a little bit of teaching how you use it. Yeah, so at first they said, cool, now we have an overview about every team, about the maturity of every team. And I don't think that it should be used exactly that way. Yeah, and then
exactly. Yeah. We do not want, so it's not the goal to assess the maturity of the team, because it does not say anything about your service delivery, right? So the challenge there maybe is to figure out at which level, where do you want to assess, and that would be as in the beginning, what is the, or maybe end-to-end flow, is this something you want to improve, and then focus your actions and alignment of culture and the practices from the maturity model on driving exactly that, right?
I think it is important if you are in a Kanban environment, and once you go through Kanban training, you will just get it and you will think in a different way. But what I find really important is that nothing in Kanban is a framework, a process, a prescriptive way of doing things. So also the Kanban maturity model is not a tick box kind of thing. We want to get to this maturity level and we tick boxes because you've seen that spreadsheet maybe. It really, for me, it is more, and that's everything in Kanban. It is like, it gives you ideas on how you can mature in your organization, in your team and across teams. And that's how you improve, but it's evolutionary change. It's evolutionary. It's not like you put this model on top of an organization and then it's going to do magic.
Yeah, good point. And maybe it's not even necessary always to go ahead saying, well, I'm going to apply the Kanban maturity model and I'm going to assess you. Yeah, that not backfire, right? And sometimes it's usually like, yeah, do it like kind of stealth mode, right? So I'm still using it from time to time for myself to reflect what's going on and to organize basically my thoughts and implementations, which is also okay.
Yeah,
so as I mentioned,
when I see new organizations, I come in as a coach, and I've got this just in the back of my coaching tools, and it helps you to assess quicker where an organization is at. Sorry, Daniel, I didn't want to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, Andreas, your story reminds me of my client that I was working with earlier this year, where very similar sort of situations, except I used it more by stealth. And in that, there wasn't, the respect and the flow things at that higher level. Maybe there were some elements of that at the team layer, but definitely not at that higher layer. And I knew myself that I actually really had to be quite patient for that pain and that stress to really bubble to the top and make its way. And when when it did really bubble up, and you've got to put in place the visualizations and the other aspects to bring that together. When it did bubble up, then it became a really solid talking point where you could actually, have better conversations around how a culture can, start to, use flow and the values of respect and things like that to actually, get that better outcomes at the sort of program portfolio type layer.
Mm-hmm. So patience is a good keyword, Daniel. As you've seen, it took years, right? 2-3 years to get where we are right now from the beginning. So it can take time. And in large organizations, you would have throwbacks on a regular cadence. Every 12 months you get punched, right? It can happen. You need to kind of find like opportunities to tickle it again a little bit, and then maybe implement something else or revamp something that has been forgotten over time. So in that case, it's it happens, right? After a stressful situation, everyone is like, yeah, party. 6 months later, you get pressured again by top management, and then you have the opportunity to pull it out of the box or draw again. So patience is a good keyword here.
Yeah. And Moise, to your question about resistance, actually, when I found out about the Kanban maturity model, I wasn't a big fan because it was called maturity model. And the big difference compared to other maturity models is that it's not in terms of Kanban maturity, even though it's called like this, but it's organizational maturity. That's the big differentiator.
Yeah, and resistance may come when you say, well, I will assess your maturity. So usually you would start, hey guys, what is important to you? What kind of outcomes you seek and are important to your organization, and then kind of move in through the Excel file or through the Kanban maturity model poster. So because it's quite easy to recommend practices. The challenge is the organization ready for it, and can you find anyone who could agree on the business outcomes? So usually it's not. If you like for Moise, if you feel that assessment maturity are kind of causing resistance, just drop the language, start talking about business outcomes, which is already hard enough. So you can spend half a year on agreeing what you need before you implement even a single practice, right? So I currently have a new customer for a couple of weeks now, also large e-commerce business. And looking at that, so again, this is where I point out, you cannot, also at least I cannot unlearn it. So I look at the organization and say, wow, we are operating a clearly ML1 organization with a lot of team silos. And people have no clue when stuff is going to be finished on time or not. And it's a Scrum business, but the thing is, it doesn't matter, right? You need to find anyone who will tell you what kind of business outcomes they want to see, if they want the predictability or not, because then you start work with leadership and communicating that collaboration, for instance, is important. You have 10 Scrum teams, they do not collaborate. They do not collaborate with different departments because they are so siloed in their thinking. And if I cannot find in the next weeks anyone who will communicate as a leader that collaboration is important, we need transparency, we need to see the progress, I can stop. That's it, right? Because there is no way of tackling 10 established, well-oiled Scrum teams and just ask them to collaborate with the finance department, for instance, right? There's no way it's going to happen because they are on a different maturity level. So even if you do not apply any practices of Kanban or do maybe even in waterfallish way, you can still use the model for reasoning about outcomes, about maturity of leadership and the culture within the organization. Just for you as a consultant, a coach, well, is it going to be successful for me, or I'm going to burn out in the next 2 years? And this is why I think it's an important coaching tool, not even for organizations, but also for people who try to drives the change in order to assess something like, okay, do I have a chance or can I just stop? Because there's not, there's no way you can change a whole culture within as a single person, especially as an alien within a large organization.
Yeah.
If you don't have the buy-in and the support of leadership and people who are actually doing the work.
But I mean, even when, as a coaching tool, when I'm new to an organization, sometimes when you really need to have the feeling if it's right, if the situation is right, but like to take it out and just explain roughly what it is about and ask them, where do you think we're at the moment? Because they are deeper in it. I'm new, right? And that usually triggers some thought process.
Right, Silke.
Pardon?
I also wanted to, sorry, did you get an answer to that, Silke? Or?
I don't know. There's somebody, I didn't get that. Somebody seems to have said something. Oh, well, you go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to mention, I find it interesting as well in when you partner with other companies as well, the maturity of that other company is going to reflect and impact your overall organization maturity. So if you're generally at 2 moving towards 3, and then you partner with an organization that's at maturity level 1, guess what? If they're part of your overall delivery stream, what's going to happen is you'll go backwards a little bit until you can help bring them up to the overall. So I think also as well, understanding the maturity of who you partner with when you go down these, larger programs of work or pieces of work is also really important, because, you might have a 6 or even 12-month period where you're reverting to help work with those folks, and then before you progress back to where you were. Andreas, have you had that sort of experience?
Yeah, I was just going to say, even if you're not partnering with different organizations, but in large enterprises like we have globally operating nowadays, even with that client, they have an office here and an office there, and an office different, different country, different culture, different people. And with the other client I have currently, they have suppliers. They sit also in India, they have suppliers across the globe, and they work all on the same platform. And you can, it's exactly like you said, maybe, you're all happy with your 1 team in Hamburg, or maybe 5 teams. What about the other 5, which are, distributed across the globe? And then in the worst case scenario, you have suppliers that you depend on in your workflow, and they are operating entirely different in a different way. So that's the point. What does it help you if you optimize in your happy place, in your bubble, just maybe one small portion of your agility within a whole workflow, right? And then again, you end up with discussion of results. How does it impact your results? And usually you will, like Daniel said, revert if you add new suppliers, organizations, collaborators, because they will impact in some way your organizational maturity, unless you are so robust that you can deal with it, right? But I haven't seen that for many years now. That it would be that easy, right? Other questions?
Folks are starting to drop off, and I just said free to do so. We just keep chatting. If there are no more questions,
I think we can probably wrap it up, Silke.
Pardon?
I think we can probably wrap it up. I think we're slowed down on the questions now.
Yeah.
It's beer time for you guys, right? And coffee time for us.
It's all good. Cool. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining today, and Andreas for swinging over to our side of the world. It was really insightful. Really enjoyed it, and also to just catch up.
Thank you very much, guys.
If you like to stay in, I will stop the recording now,